Hi, Diefesters. My name is Rudolph Vincent, and I am the founder of Diefest Global. A warm welcome to you all on the third edition. This year, Diefest will focus on the future of work by addressing authenticity, belongingness, and social impact as some of the most important practices for building a more inclusive and purpose driven workplace for everyone to thrive. Before we begin, I would like to humbly thank our belonging partner, Newsella, for supporting our initiative in democratizing world class content and promoting equity in education. On this note, I would like to welcome you to our session on barriers people from marginalized groups face in leadership positions. Our moderator for today is a marketing and communications leader who most recently served as the Vice President of Marketing and Studio Operations with Warner Brothers. She previously held a position as a Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy for Warner Media News and Sports, where she was responsible for driving the division's DEI strategy, core vision, internal and external programs, and opportunities that drove awareness. In addition, she is passionate about sharing her life and career experiences with students and industry organizations. She was recognized by Cablefax with its inaugural D&I Champion Award for her work in this space and by the National Diversity Council as a DEI champion. Please welcome Andrea Bibbs.
Thank you for that introduction, Rudolph. Very nice. Welcome, everyone. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. As Rudy said, we're having a conversation on the barriers that people from marginalized communities face when they get into leadership positions. I'll be having this discussion with three amazing individuals who represent three really distinct industries. We're representing retail, transportation, and technology, and we're going to have a really great conversation. So we'll not only be talking about the obstacles people in these groups face in leadership, but we'll also be sharing personal stories, insights, and advice. So both for the decision makers in organizations, as well as the people from these communities who may be experiencing some of these challenges as they navigate in the leadership ranks. We'd also love to answer any questions you all have. So for those of you watching us on YouTube, feel free to enter your questions in the chat and I'll be looking at that and we'll hope to incorporate some of those questions along the way as well. So to start off, I'd love for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their role and their background. So we'll start with Brooke Stoval.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Brooke Stoval. I am currently the Senior Manager of Diversity and Belonging for Jack Henry, which is a fintech company. I've been in this space as a practitioner for a while, almost 7 years now. And each day is always a new day, so never boring work at all. And I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation and share some of what my journey has been like. So thank you for having me.
That's great. Thanks, Brooke. And I'll put it over to Connor Marwick.
Thank you. So yes, my name's Connor. Currently, I'm the Director of Organizational Development and People at TransLink. So TransLink is the transit authority in British Columbia, Canada. So what our team does is leadership development, succession planning, culture engagement. My background is in industrial and organizational psychology, so that's where I have my education and experience. But I also have quite a passion for EDI subjects. My past research has been in marriage equality back in Australia, where I'm from, in sexuality and social justice. And also I co-chair currently the Pride and Allies ERG for TransLink. So very excited to be here to learn from these great EDI people and to kind of put my spin on it as well.
That's great. Thank you, Connor. And last but not least, Michelle Marshall.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Marshall. I am the first head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Puma North America. I'm sure many of you have heard of Puma. Puma is a global company. We focus on sneakers and sports apparel. And I also have been in this journey for 10 plus years. I've worked in finance and nonprofit. And I'm very excited to be here today just to talk about my journey and just to give some tips because I love this work. This is what I call purpose-driven work. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And that was a perfect segue because my first question, and this is for each of you, we've talked about it in our prep call. I've talked about it individually with some of you that, we know that the pathway to leadership is not a straight path for people of color, for people from the LGBTQ plus communities and other marginalized groups, right? So I'd love to start by asking each of you to talk about a challenge that you've encountered on your journey to leadership. I'll start with you, Michelle.
Okay, I have several stories, but I'll try to hone in on just some few moments in time. I know early on in my career when I was coming up, I've always been, I believe, an overachiever. I always want to do my job well, and I'm always looking to the next level and what else can I do to level up. And I just remember being early on in my career, and you would know back in the day when I was working within the corporation I was working at, you would know who was the chosen ones because they started walking differently. They started carrying certain books in their hand. They started using certain language. You started seeing them pulled into projects. And I would be the employee that's coming in early, staying late, raising my hand for projects, trying to do my best job, I got great performance reviews. I would go to leadership and let them know that I want to move up. Oftentimes that was kind of dismissed, and there was really no rhyme or reason or feedback as to what I needed to do to move into that next level of leadership. So I would take it and personal and internalize it as if it was a rejection of me or if I wasn't good enough. And I remember oftentimes I would go in the restroom and cry and try to come out and get myself together for all the things that I was encountering within the workplace. Till it got to the point where my mother gave me this great statement. She said this great thing one day when I said, "They're blocking me. They're not letting me move forward. They're not trying to help me." And she told me that God hands out the promotions. And when she said God hands out the promotions. And when she told me that, it changed my mindset and really gave me this empowerment. And I started to go into a area of my life where I didn't see barriers. And I said, okay, you're not going to pick and choose me. You're not going to give me the book to read to level up as a leader. I'm going to go to the library and buy that book. No one's saying I can't go buy that same book and learn the same things that the chosen ones are learning. I started going beyond my manager and going to like leaders levels above them and really building those relationships and asking them for projects. And when I would come back to the leaders and talk about the projects I was working on with those leaders, they couldn't say you couldn't do it because that person was much higher than even their job level. So I just started looking for those opportunities internally and also looking for those volunteer opportunities with organizations that tied into the work that I wanted to do to ensure that I was able to pull together the experience and the skill sets needed to go to that next level.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that and being so transparent. I mean, I think this is something we all talked about in terms of that, that extra work, right? That people from these groups, like that all of us have had to do to kind of be able to advance. And I think it's important for people to realize that, especially if they're not from any of these marginalized groups, to just hear these stories of just that extra work. So thank you again, Michelle, for sharing. Connor, what about you?
Yeah, I was kind of mulling this over in the last couple of days, and I don't have like a specific example, but for me, as a queer person growing up, especially, my queerness was always on my mind. It was always part about what I did. So, am I being too gay? Am I being too flamboyant? Am I saying the wrong things? Am I dressing a certain way? Because you never wanted to be called out. You wanted to be, thought of as a straight person. Well, that's how I was when I was young. A lot of self-doubt, self-hate. So I find that moving into my professional life, becoming an adult, I've had leaders who have actively asked me to play it down, to cool it, to chill it. Whether it be directly or indirectly, they're like, oh, maybe just like cool your energy a little bit. for this group, for this, you're working with the CEO, you're working with an executive, or you're working with people from the operations or maintenance areas. And that just used to bring up so much doubt for me and impact my confidence. And I talk to a lot of friends about this, and we tend to have quite similar stories where, we just feel very different, very othered in different environments, and especially in professional ones. So I've had those experiences. I've got to say now I have leadership who's extremely supportive and they celebrate what I do. And you'll see I have my flag behind me.
Yes.
I said to the group, we had an event today for the enterprise at our head office, and I was repping the Pride ERG, and I feel extremely confident and empowered in what I do. So I feel like that's allowed me to excel in my career and in my work, because I bring all I am to what I do. I'm not constantly thinking about how am I presenting, what do people think of me, am I being too gay or too out there. I'm focusing on the work I need to do, the people I need to help. So I think that's huge, and I don't think I've really reflected a whole heap on it until you kind of put this question forward to me. So I appreciate that, and it's something I'm going to be thinking about for a little while longer.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, like you said, like it's really heavy to hide parts of you, right? And to hide who you are, because you can't be a true leader if you can't, show up as all that you are. So it really means a lot when you're in an organization where you can be yourself, right? So that's great.
100%.
Thank you for sharing, Connor. Brooke.
Yes, I think Michelle, you could have written my story, my answer to that question, because it's so similar. I definitely just think back to even in childhood. I've been a leader ever since then. I've always saw myself as the head of this, being in charge. So entering into a workplace, I felt like it's no different. This is natural, to me. And when you start facing those challenges, like, why doesn't everyone else see that this is just natural skills and abilities that I have, and put me in those positions? You start to question yourself. And I too went to find the books. I paid for my own out of my own pocket to go to professional development conferences, attend webinars. Even the company did support well, but I felt like, hey, that's not enough. Apparently I have to do it on my own. And then it was going to people outside of my own direct leadership and offering, how can I help? What projects do you have coming up? How can I lend, my expertise to get my own name out there in front of more and other people? But having to kind of take it into my own hands to be responsible for is really where I started, to see myself making the name for myself and people noticing me, because it wasn't because necessarily people were saying my name in those rooms. I had to kick the door down and put myself in those rooms. So that's been, really what the journey, has felt like over the years.
Yeah. And I think when you're doing all that work, by the time you get to the leadership position, you could be exhausted, right? You could be tired because nothing was necessarily handed to you. You had to do a lot to get there. So thank you, Brooke, for sharing that as well. Just reflecting on what all of you have been saying. I mean, you talk a lot about the things that you all have had to do. What are some of the ways that we feel like, or that you all feel like, that organizations can genuinely address some of these structural and systemic barriers that, these communities face when they advance to these ranks? I think you all touched on a lot of it, but now, especially for decision makers who are watching this, or people who are senior leaders in these organizations as they're thinking about their leadership teams, what do you think that they really need to address to make things a little bit more equitable and easier for some of these groups to get into the leadership positions? Any of you can start.
I would say first acknowledging, you have to be honest with what the state of things are. Really take a look around your organizations and say, what does leadership look like here? And really take an honest assessment to say who's missing, who's not represented, and acknowledging how that happened, because it didn't look like that overnight, and then what is causing it to be that way, and say we've got to start doing something different. And it's, you know, so I think first and foremost, it's really just acknowledging that it is the way that it is, and then creating and saying leadership doesn't always have to look like the way we assumed that it did, because the people who had always been in leadership looked a certain way or were certain people, and not, you know, start looking at leadership can look different. People with leadership skills looks different. Leadership skills in general look different, you know, for different people, and start thinking different. So that's what I would say first and foremost.
Right. It's important. Michelle, Connor, anything to add?
And I would just jump in and say, just giving the basics, just supporting someone getting into those roles, just understand that we're all human beings. Oftentimes, people that are the only ones in leadership positions are experiencing or on the receiving end of microaggressions because someone thinks they have to use certain language or talk a certain way or do certain things or talk about certain topics to make them feel included. How about just start with asking them, how's their family? Did you watch the game tonight? And it's not treating us or treating this people, period, that's from diverse backgrounds that may not be reflective of the people that's already at the table. Stop treating them like they're aliens, like they're something far beyond that you've never experienced before. And just learn how to make sure that you're providing a psychological safe environment. So whoever is at the table, they feel that they can thrive and feel they have a true place of belonging within their workplace, and they're not having to do more to fit in. Because at the end of the day, most businesses or all businesses are worried about the bottom line. And right. if you're worried about the bottom line, you want your employees to be the most productive that they can be. And the way to do that is to ensure that you're providing them with the tools they need within the workplace so they can feel supported and feel like they want to be committed to their organization. So those simple things like just inclusive language, that psychological safety, just setting them up for success, making sure that if they don't have a community, making sure you're providing those resources and those opportunities for them to find a community so they can get the support they need to be able to thrive.
Right. And community is something that, you know, the four of us talked a lot about, right? And I think each of you have sort of mentioned it in a way as well, you know, finding your tribe, finding your people to help you navigate as you're advancing as well. Connor, I'd love to, you know, start this question with you. You know, you are the chair of the, you know, the Pride and Allies ERG at your organization. What role do you think like the ERGs play in, you know, not only that sense of community, but also just in leadership development, especially for people from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, totally. It's for us, ERGs are relatively new. We've had the Pride one for some time, but we've really grown to now a group of 5, which is pretty quick within the year and a half that it's been offered. And in that time, I've seen a lot of individual contributors participate in leadership roles within these ERGs. Even my co-chair, who's watching at the moment, Erwin, he and I worked today just to build up this program for our fair. We do all the events that are run from the ERG and the educational pieces. He takes a really strong lead, and I see it across the other ERGs as well. It's just another opportunity to create a safe place for that failure, for that, you know, making a mistake, giving it a go, experimental kind of approach, which we're trying to get with all of our leaders. We're so scared to make mistakes because what's going to happen, you know, if we do make a mistake, everything's going to kind of burn down. But I think from marginalized groups, especially from those from the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, we have a lot of fear about, you know, trial and error. You know, we don't feel like we have the opportunity to try again. So I think here we do get that opportunity to have fun, to try something. If it doesn't work, we have a safe place in which to learn from it. And I think regardless of what work background you have lived experience in this community. So that builds your confidence to kind of go, I'm going to give it a go and see how it is. And I'm going to take control and take lead on this, something that I know that a lot of these other co-chairs haven't done in their regular work because they just don't get the opportunity, or there's a lot of fear or concern about pushing for that opportunity. So I think it does create that safe place.
Right. And for you, Brooke and Michelle, like what role do you think, employee resources groups have played in your own personal journeys toward like leadership, or what have you seen for your employees in terms of like what they're getting out of, being a part of these ERGs in your organizations?
Yeah, ERGs have definitely been vital, a part of my career. I've started a few because I've needed them, for myself when you're the one or the only or the few. So having a place to come together with, your tribe or, people who have same or similar experience, want to just validate that what you're experiencing or what you're thinking, that you're not the only one. You're not crazy that you feel that way, or you're not making things up of what your experience is. I think to come and share that it's happening and learning how to navigate. And I think exactly what, Connor mentioned as well is that overall just having a safe space to come together and fail safely when it's necessary, grow, develop, practice, those leadership, skills that you need to take back out into, to the workplace. But if you get it wrong or you mess up, it's okay. And, those are your people that are around you, and, they're going to be there to tell you it's okay. Let's try again. Let's try a different way. And then I think what it has helped eliminate sometimes for me is, as a person from a marginalized group, is carrying the burden that if I do go out and mess it up in my workplace, I've ruined it for all the others, that it won't be an opportunity for another Black woman to be in leadership after me because I've messed it up. And now that's what people think of all of us. So the having an ERG just really created a place for us to safely practice and, take away the fear, as Connor mentioned.
That's great. I love that. Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said thus far. And just for me, I was one of the first diversity council chairs in my former company when they first started on their D&I journey over 10 years ago. And for me, it was a safe space because we were able to really come up with those things that we went through uniquely, and was able to ask the organization, can we have resources so we can bring in speakers to talk around these topics? So much so, just even as a woman or a woman of color, just thinking about the different things that we have to think about, like code switching and microaggressions when it comes to our hair and all those different topics. And just having those tools and having those type of conversations helped me to get the tools to better navigate the day-to-day circumstances I was dealing with. And also to the point where even with my current ERGs, because I've launched 5 ERGs since starting Puma, and I still don't quite see them moving in that direction, because I encourage my employee resource groups to be autonomous groups, and I've given them the framework, but I think even they are afraid to start doing those things. And I keep coaching them and generally saying, look, this is your group, this is your community. What are those things that you have to deal with day to day, that bothers you day to day, that you need the tools to navigate? And then start from there, from building from the opportunities and the learnings and the type of things that you want to see come into the environment, so you can have the tools you need to be able to navigate the day-to-day of being on the receiving end of microaggressions and biases.
Right. And I think what, all three of you have talked about is just even the way that these groups can help build confidence in folks, especially when they're not feeling it, or if they're getting those microaggressions or feeling like they have to code switch in other environments. I know that we've kind of talked about it a bit, but like, how detrimental do you all feel like the microaggressions can be, and the code switching, like the burdens on these folks who are dealing with these every day? Because I think sometimes people don't even understand like what microaggressions can look like or sound like. So, I mean, maybe let's start there, for whoever wants to start. Like, what are some examples for folks who are watching this, who may not understand that maybe something that they're saying, like Connor, like what you were talking about earlier, when someone said to you, can you just like tone down your energy, how that can be perceived as a microaggression? Do any of you want to just share some of examples of ones so that folks know?
I will jump in. I don't know the exact data points. I can't remember the exact data points, but there was an article, I believe it's in the Washington Post, about how people were reporting that microaggressions had decreased since COVID, because they were now at home and in with a safe environment, and weren't having to deal with the day-to-day of going into the office and dealing with all that they have to deal with when it comes to those microaggressions. And for many of those who've been on the receiving end of the microaggressions, they can affect you from a mental and emotional standpoint, to the point where you just want to shut down, and you're not your best self. You're not thriving in your workplace because you don't feel like you're in a safe environment. And just examples of microaggressions is me being a Black woman and someone referring to me as aggressive if I just want to assert myself or form an opinion, and you're watching someone across the table from you doing the same thing, but no one's using that same word for them. And just those day-to-day nuances, calling out things about how you behave, how you talk, and to the point where you're afraid to be yourself. And you, once what I talked about earlier, just early in my career, you question yourself, you question if you're good enough. You start to affect your self-confidence, your self-esteem. When in actuality, you shouldn't question yourself because of those behaviors that you're on the receiving end of. We should be able to be empowered to have a conversation and pull someone to the side and talk about how it's making us feel. But I think I saw a video talking about mosquito bites and how it's just constant bites all day to the point where it start bubbling up, and you just can't constantly address every single microaggression, because a lot of us, as soon as we wake up and go into the walls of our organization, it's like those nuances of things that we're not even looking for. We just want to live our best lives and just go to work. But it's just constant things that's happening throughout that can be a burden on people of color or people from various marginalized communities and diverse backgrounds that they have to deal with and shouldn't deal with. And that's why even within my organization, not only do I offer up the trainings for identifying how you may be projecting microaggressions, I also offer mental health resources for employees that's on the receiving end of those things, so they can receive the tools that they need to navigate that day to day.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's also important that you have conscious leaders, conscious allies who are going to also like bring those up on behalf of folks, right? So that, you know, these people from these groups don't always have to be the ones talking about it or bringing it up to light. Connor or Brooke, do you have anything else to add?
I think if there's just been some examples, Michelle, you definitely touched on, you know, a lot of them, and especially the aggressive, you know, as a Black woman, or I've had, you know, in past organizations, even told that I couldn't be promoted because I didn't have the likability factor. And, you know, what is that, you know, but that being a reason why I was discounted for, you know, the ability to move forward in the organization, or even just always, you know, conversations about my hair, because I could change it often or it could look different. And that's, you know, what we're talking about instead of, you know, talking about business. And then I don't get to, you know, show that I have the knowledge and skill of, you know, the actual business conversations, you know, going on because we're talking about my hair. And, you know, those are the things that those weigh on you, you know, those weigh on you. So I would just add those few things.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly jump in. I like Michelle's kind of reference to the mosquito bites. I was thinking kind of death by 1,000 cuts. And I think sometimes you just don't expect it, I suppose, when you're in a workplace, a professional place where people are adults and should be treating each other kind of fairly. So when it happens, it is extremely jarring. And it just makes, like, I feel I revert back and I become young again, and I'm just like, oh God, like maybe they're right, and that like inner saboteur kind of concept comes up. So yeah, it seems so little to people who don't receive it, so it's very hard to quantify to someone who doesn't understand.
Exactly. But I'm glad, I mean, again, I'm thankful for all of you for just being so just vulnerable and transparent too, to be able to share this, because I think it will definitely help some people who don't, again, like usually have to be on the receiving end of these microaggressions. Switching gears again, I mean, I know that we were talking about ERGs and the importance of those, and those are obviously internal. What do you think organizations can do to support this group of leaders externally as well? What do you think are some ways that they can kind of really give them some more leadership development or exposure, or the, you know, the importance of that?
Resources, whether it is access to coaching, executive level coaching, being willing to give them funds to attend conferences geared towards them. You know, we all need what we need, you know, so the ability to, you know, attend workshops and conferences to even expand our network, because you may be in organizations where giving you a mentor within the organization is not what you need, because there aren't, you know, others like you, or even a tribe within that organization for you to build. So being able to invest in you to go outside of the organization to get the things that you need, I think it's a huge way for companies to support.
Yeah, and for them to be proactive about it and not putting the onus of these people just asking, you know, all the time. So I think that's critical as well. Connor or Michelle, do either of you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I'd written in my notes, put your money where your mouth is, because
yeah,
a lot of the time we love, like, companies love to talk about values, and you know, we grow our people and we grow our leaders, and then you're like, well, where's the receipts? Like, I can't see any opportunity here, and even it comes up back to something as simple as just individual development. Like, really good point, Brooke, is everyone has different needs, and it's so hard for us to be like, here is just a standard way of developing someone. We need to go outside of the box now to think of ways to engage different groups based on, you know, where they're from, how they think, their background, because we want the best out of our employees. We want to empower them with their own development. So absolutely good resourcing and funding for external opportunities, but they need to be value-based. They need to be needs-based as well. So what the person actually requires for their own development. Because yeah, as I said, everyone's at different points. And I know that's a very hard one to sell at this time. And financially, there's a lot of companies that are like, our budget season is right now, and it is rough. So it is really hard to try and sell the value of kind of what someone in my team calls luxury items. Sometimes development is considered a luxury item. Luckily, our business went completely opposite way during COVID, and they kind of were like, well, we need to put more into our people. I think we were extremely lucky to have leaders who thought that way. I've seen other businesses around us and peers of mine lose funding, lose their jobs during this time. So yeah, it's a hard one to balance, but funding and resourcing for sure.
Definitely. And I mean, I think the discussion that we had earlier as well, we were talking about these generations coming up now, like Gen Z and kind of later millennials, right? That they're the ones that are, you know, I think really shifting the way that organizations are looking at how they recruit and retain folks, because I think this group are very vocal about like some of the things that you said, Connor and Brooke and Michelle too. It's just that, you know, put your money where your mouth is, or you said this in 2020, but what are you actually doing? Or you say that you want, you know, all people here, but do you have equal parental rights? You know, all of that, right? So, you know, this is just a discussion question for all of you. You know, how do you guys really think that Gen Z, that group is really shifting the ways that, you know, we work and how these organizations are functioning moving forward?
I will say Gen Z, I will call them the information generation, because they now have the information and the labels of what to call in terms of things that's happening to them. I had a Gen Z employee told me that someone's mansplaining something to her. Years ago, we would have just said, oh, my male boss is talking to me in a certain type of way. But now they have the information and the tools, because they're the social media, internet generation, to label what's happening to them. And oftentimes when I bring up Gen Z or millennials at various places, it's like you see an eye roll, but instead of rolling your eyes, understand this is now going to, at some point, be the larger percentage of your workforce. And if you want to keep People within your workforce, you need to understand what makes this generation tick. And a lot of things that make this generation tick, it goes to organization. I think we talked about putting your money where your mouth is, talking the talk, walking the walk. They're a generation that's focused on social justice and impact. They want to make sure there's an inclusive organization. They want to understand what is that career path. I know so many of us coming up in the workforce and our parents and baby boomers stayed at organizations for 20 years, being given that promise of promotion to the next level. And they were fighting for 5 years. Just one more year, I'll be a director and those type of things. But Gen Z is like, I am putting in the work. I'm putting the hours. Like, tell me what the career path is. And they want the tools and the learning and development in order for them to move in those directions. So the quicker that these organizations lean in and understand that the workforce is changing and that you have no choice but to understand this generation that it will soon become the larger majority of the workforce, then it will be better for the organization, because they won't always have to think about how can we invest more dollars in what programming to retain these employees. Right now, we're still going through the Great Recession, and I believe the other term is quiet quitting, because there's so much competition out there. People are really leveling up, understanding that in order for us to keep our workforce intact, in order for us to keep Gen Z intact, we need to do certain things. We need to make sure we're working remote. We have hybrid schedules. We have all these resources. We have mental health resources in place. So to that, I would just say, take the time to understand what makes this generation tick, and don't just look it up and Google it. Talk to them, because they will tell you what you need to know and what they need to thrive.
Love that.
Yeah, it's I feel like I wrote the very similar thing. You know, some of our leaders still think that Gen Z and millennials are like mythical creatures that are not around, or they're still children who are coming. They're here and they're such a big part of the workforce, and they're just going to take over. So there are people moving forward that we really need to focus on attracting and retaining. I think that's a key piece for us, where we're currently building our employee value proposition. So really determining what is it that we provide our people beyond compensation and just standard benefits when they come to the business. Like, and a value alignment is huge. People want to know, and we're lucky in transportation, because our key focus is to build a sustainable region. We are connecting marginalized people. We're trying to make things cleaner and greener. So we need to showcase that's what gets me out of bed every day. I've been here for over 5 years now, and I love doing what I do, because I feel like in this world where things are terrifying, we're just talking about how hot and cold and weird it is weather-wise, and that's on my mind every day, and it's on younger people's minds, because they have access to that information. They know the truth. They know what's happening. So that value alignment is so important for them to know, I'm not just earning a paycheck, I'm doing something to take control of this situation that is just terrifying every single day for me. There's a lot of anxiety out there. So I just think that value piece is so important, and you can't lie anymore. You can't say, oh, we are so equitable, and then have just all these examples of where you're just absolutely not doing it, because they find out, like Michelle said, they do the research. They just a quick Google search. It's not that hard, but like they find out, and they have the power now to pick and choose who they work for a lot more than it used to be, where we were like, great, we have 20 people to choose from. Sell yourself to me. It's the other way around now, and some of our leaders have gotten that. Others, it's just taken a little bit longer because maybe they haven't hired for a while, but that's just the reality.
Right. And this generation is influencing the other, older millennials, Gen X like me, and others, right? To push a bit farther, as you said. I feel like it's the shift that we're going to be going in terms of, people who are looking for roles. And so we have about 5-6 more minutes. My last couple questions is really around the advice that you all would give to a new leader who's from a marginalized group as they begin this next chapter in their career, especially if they are, like we talked about, the only one or one of a few. I'd like to hear from each of you, maybe starting with Brooke. what advice or encouragement would you give them?
I would tell them to trust themselves, trust their voice, trust their skills, trust their ability. The current state that the workforce, the workplace, what it's looking like is changing. And we no longer have to, sit back and wait, for someone to recognize you, to recognize your skill. Trust what you know is, your unique talent, skills, and ability, and use your voice to, ask for what you want, go for it. And when something or a place no longer serves you, it's okay to leave. It is okay to leave. We're no longer, our parents or grandparents that you all said that'll stay at a place for 20 to 30 years and, just take it or be, in an unhealthy environment. We have options. So right. It's okay to leave what no longer serves you.
Love that, Brooke. Michelle?
I think similar to what Brooke said, just know your value, know what you bring to the table, know your worth. As long as you remember those things and why you were invited to the table and know that you have the experience, the skills, and you're supposed to be at that table, remembering those things will help you to not deter from that when someone's questioning your abilities, when someone's not signing you up for opportunities because of whatever their biases are. So as long as you remember who you are, then you will be able to navigate things better, and you won't be the young lady I was where you're doubting yourself and you're feeling rejected and taking it personal and thinking it's you that is something that you're lacking, the reason that you're not advancing. The other thing I will say to that is don't suffer in silence. It is okay to go get a therapist. It's okay to get a life coach. It's okay to ask your company, can you pay for this executive coach? Because I feel like it will help me give me the tools I need so I can do a better job for you and show up for you better as an employer. So make sure you're asking for your resources. A lot of times, especially being in my field, a lot of us suffer, and we expect the organization just to look at us suffering and say, hey, here go you a team, here go you a budget. Make sure you are asking for what you need. Closed mouths do not get fed. Make sure you're working with someone to get the skills needed to present the business case and the strategy needed for you to be able to present that to your leaders and advocate for your resources.
Love that. Connor?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of those comments. I think do your homework, do your study, do your research, make sure you're well educated on the topics that you're covering. I find now that there is a lot more appreciation for radical ideas, for innovation. And I feel like young people especially can bring that to the table. I feel like that's just how we are automatically switched on to think. Businesses have to be super nimble now. Like we need that skill set. So that's a true value. And I loved what Brooke said, like you've been brought in for a reason. You have a skill set. Don't doubt that. Don't suffer in silence either. I only just recently asked for a coach as well. And for me, I think that's just imperative for me to do my job, is to learn some of the intricate parts of my new role. So I think, yeah, it can be really hard when you first move into a business, but if you know what you're talking about, you can prove that you belong at the table. But yeah, I love these points brought forward.
That's great. Thank you for that. And then lastly, if you could speak directly to the HR folks or decision makers at organizations or people who are in control of kind of creating the leadership teams, what advice would you give to them in terms of making sure they're really intentional about and inclusive in terms of the leadership teams that they're creating?
I will jump in there and say, don't just focus on the recruitment piece, because I think that's where a lot of organizations start and end with, oh, let's see how we can get some diverse talent in. Make sure you're building an inclusive organization where when you get the talent in, you're retaining them. Make sure you're incorporating diverse practices into the succession planning, because that is a lot of times where it's closing the gap for diverse talent to get into the leadership ranks, because sometimes, like I say, at times the fix may already be in, because as you look at the succession plan, There's no one from a marginalized community anywhere in the ranks of that succession plan to move into some of those leadership roles. So make sure you're intentionally putting programming in place so that certain talent is being not only mentored, but there's an intentional sponsorship of those employees. So someone is saying their name in the rooms when they're not in the room. Someone's advocating for them and making sure they're getting the right projects. And also the last piece of that is just look at your practices and make sure they're equitable. I'll give you one quick story, and I know we're running out of time. Well, I'll leave my story with one quick story for a woman. She talked about how she was studying for her financial management test, and her colleague was like, "Oh, you can knock that out. Go to Starbucks and just study in the evening." She was like, "Well, actually, I have kids who are in school and they have to do their homework, so I can just go to Starbucks and knock it out." So think about those type of things and how you can be more equitable as an organization to make sure everyone has the resources that they need so they are on equal footing when it comes to those type of things, and that's setting them up for leadership and promotion.
Great.
I would say have your whoever your D&I practitioner, wherever level that they're in, they should be involved in all the aspects of the things that you're doing within HR or even in your business. Because if you leave them out, that's exactly how, all of these things happen. Mm-hmm. So involve your person. Like I have the benefit of being all involved. I tell, our HR department, I'm in everybody's business. So, I think that is key to making sure that we, find out where there are gaps, where can we, fill in some blind spots that we're having, because you have someone intentionally looking for them.
Mm-hmm. And Connor, you have the last word.
Oh, goodness. I had two thoughts. So one was kind of, especially in our work, it's so important for our leadership. And we have executive leadership, we have board directors, we have mayors that we report into. Having leadership that is representative of the communities that we serve. Mm-hmm. If you are a human being in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, you are a customer of ours. So we need to have some representation, to have some diversity of thought. It's so important to make sure that we're considering where people have come from and how they're impacted by, transit and other things that we offer on a day-to-day basis, so we can make decisions on their behalf that are more informed. And the final point, and something that the more I'm moving into leadership positions, the more I've realized is important, is accountability. It is just missing in so many places. We have amazing programs. We have an amazing EDI director who does amazing work. And it can hit all of our individual contributors. But if we have executive leadership that is not living it and walking that talk, it just sends that message straight away that doesn't even matter. You've wasted your time. So we waste all that good money and time we spend on all these programs when our leaders, and sometimes actively, are detracting from that work. So it's so important for our C-suite and for kind of our CEO especially, who is brilliant, to hold their leaders accountable to certain behaviors and actions and expectations, because otherwise, it's just a big waste of time.
Yeah. That's a perfect way to end this. I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, your gems, and this, whoever is watching this, I feel like has gotten a ton of great information. I've gotten a ton of great insights from each and every one of you. So I thank you all for taking the time to be on this panel and to share such great insights with everyone. And I thank everyone who's watching this as well on YouTube, whether you're watching live or tomorrow or later in the week. Feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn if you want to hear more from us, and be sure to continue to check out this great programming in the DIFEST conference. Actually, earlier today, there was a panel around microaggressions and the impact on mental health. So that's a great one. And there's a ton of great ones happening tomorrow as well. So thank you again. Thank you for taking time to listen to our panel. And again, Brooke, Michelle, Connor, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.